Alright guys, so if you spend a lot of time online, you may have seen this image floating around on your socials. One of my friends certainly did, and they thought it would be hilarious to subject me to having to read it, and so they gifted it to me. Now, I don't know what I did to this friend to make them want to punish me so much, but it must have been bad. I decided to pass the knowledge that I gained on to you, my dear watcher. And to be fair, the book isn't as bad as that one clip taken out of context makes it seem. I do have a lot of thoughts that I can't convince any of my real life friends to listen to, but their loss is your gain, as you get to hear the plot and my suggestions on improving this book. Join me on a journey through questionable characters and some valiant attempts at a plot as we journey through How Does It Feel? Now, I will be spoiling the whole book, so if you want to read it and experience it for yourself, please click away now and come back later. Have a look in the description for the content warnings, as some of the scenes in this book are not exactly 12A. For the Americans in the audience, that's our version of PG-13. If you've already read it and you want to skip past the plot summary to my thoughts on improving the book, please just feel free to skip ahead to the timestamp that's on the screen right now. So, slip with me through the fairy circle and into the land of allegedly attractive fairy princes. Part 2, the plot recap. The book does start off strongly with a dedication that reads, "My hope is not that you finish this book, but that this book finishes you," which is interesting. The book is written in first person, which means that we get the book mostly from Callie, our main character's point of view, although there are a couple of chapters that come from the love interest, Prince Mendax. This means that we're privy to all of Callie's inner thoughts and feelings, and I know, this is just primary school level literature knowledge at this point, but I promise it'll be relevant later. We open with Callie in a dungeon, and she's preparing a charcuterie board of snacks for a rat that comes to visit her. As you do. But we soon learn that she's not alone in her cell. She has to be silent, or it will wake and hurt her again. Spooky. The rat, that she's imaginately called Brown Rat, turns up and he says, "Oh my stars, I failed you. He's on the way. You mustn't give up." So who is he? We don't know, but before we can gather any further information, the unknown creature in the corner of the cell wakes up and throws a rock at them, at which point Brown Rat sensibly pieces out and leaves through this little crack in the wall. We get at this point a better view of Callie's cellmate. The creature looks like a tree stump body with thorny branches for limbs. The tree stump says, "I'm going to kill you slowly. You'll be begging for death before I'm finished with you." And he also says some other things which I'm just not going to repeat. If you read the meme screenshot that I showed you earlier, you can probably guess what exactly he's threatening to do with her. But suffice to say, it doesn't want to take her out for a nice dinner and a chat about their favourite TV shows. Anyway, this creature reaches out with its brambles, ready to hook its thorns into Callie's skin and start the torture. But just at that moment, an enormously muscular Fae bursts into Callie's cell. Who's this new character? Well, he's Prince Mendax, Prince of the Unseelie Fae and alleged hottest man alive. Mendax takes Callie away from her evil cellmate, but it's not because he wants to save her. He tells Callie that she's going to be taken to the Chamber of Blood. And I mean, so far so good, right? We've got tension. First when we're wondering if Callie's about to get torn to pieces by Thorns, and then when we're wondering what's going to happen in the Chamber of Blood. We have mystery when we're wondering who her cellmate is and what Callie's relationship is to this hench fairy who's just stepped into her cell. And also, how did she get here in the first place? From this point, we skip 3 weeks back in time when Callie's driving to work at her job as an environmental scientist, where she studies lunar moths. She's just your average, quirky, young adult female protagonist who drives a barely functioning truck instead of a car and is definitely not dating Cliff, the handsome colleague who spends most of his time coming on to her. As Callie drives, we're treated to a description of her physical appearance, and oh joy. She's 29 and she's single, with waist-length bright blonde hair and a good figure, and a bubbly, perky nature. She looks like a Barbie, so we're told, even though she's never liked Barbie. According to Callie, all of the other women in the town are extremely jealous of her, worrying that she's going to pull a Jolene and steal their out-of-shape, misogynistic hillbilly husbands. So far, so par for the core self-insert protagonist. We are reassured that she's attractive, but that she's not shallow. Now, I actually have nothing against self-insert main characters. They serve a purpose after all, and there's nothing wrong with escapism. I know that this conversation has been had to death, but society does seem unnecessarily harsh on female YA protagonists. After all, we don't criticise Superman or James Bond or the male characters that serve a similar purpose, so I don't see why we've got to be harsh on the women. I do, however, dislike that Callie is immediately pitted against other women. You know, they're worried that she's going to steal their men or whatever. I wonder if this is a theme that might continue through the book. We'll just have to keep reading to find out, guys. But back to the plot. Callie's truck breaks down when she stops abruptly to avoid running over a turkey hen named Dorothy that rushes out in front of her vehicle. Apparently Dorothy, and every other animal that Callie encounters, becomes instantly infatuated with our protagonist. Callie loves all animals, and all animals love her, except for snakes. They follow her around and fawn over her and generally produce the Disney princess effect. Callie's extremely excited when she gets to work because the microscope that she's ordered has finally been delivered. Specifically, an ALM scope B/20C, if that means anything to any of you. She can't wait to use it for her work. And what is her work? Well, Callie's a STEM girly. Her mission is explained in what one could consider to be unnecessary detail, but the long and the short of it is, there's a parasite that's killing off the moths that Callie is studying. She wants to impregnate the moth's water supply with a toxin made from a certain fungus, and this toxin is going to kill off the parasites but won't affect the moths. To be fair, that is actually quite interesting. Maybe that's just me, but I think that's a cool way of getting around a problem. Callie's co-workers mention to her that she seems closed off. They say things like, oh, you know, you've been here for years, but you never open up. People in this town would love to be your friends if you'd let them. Stuff like that. But the point is, Callie keeps her distance. It does set her to thinking, though, and we learn later that the reason that she doesn't want to open up to people is that her mother and sister both died in a traffic collision. Callie goes further on this trip down memory lane, and she also starts remembering a different event from her childhood. So when she was little, she came across a golden fairy chilling in a mushroom patch in her garden. Little Callie is, of course, extremely excited by this and decides to ask the fairy how she can become one herself. Before she can ask her question, though, a crow starts to attack the golden fae. Little Callie throws herself on top of the golden fairy to protect it, and it turns out that this crow is actually an evil fairy queen with wings made of black smoke, and all it wants to do is to kill the nice golden fairy. Baby Callie wakes up in the hospital a little bit later, and her family tells her that the mushroom patch that she found gave her hallucination and the fairies weren't real. Callie doesn't believe them, especially as she has a lasting scar on her palm from the fight. No one believes her but her best friend Eli, and the experience is what got her interested in winged creatures in the first place. Back in the present day, Callie bumps into the town-eccentric Crazy Earl. It turns out that Earl is actually a specialist on the type of mushroom that Callie needs to save the moths. And they're both like, oh my god, I've never met someone who's as into in fungus as I am. So their new friendship is sealed when Callie shows Earl her snazzy new microscope and lets him check out the slide samples that she's already created, including one that she took from the toilet of a local restaurant, which, come on Callie, what the hell? Anyway, Earl tells Callie that the mushrooms she'll need to save the moths are the ones that gave him his reputation of being crazy, and they're called Destroying Angels. He knows that they're in the forest surrounding the town, but he doesn't know exactly where that they'll pop up, so they have to go hiking out into the forest to try and find them. After several trips, Callie and Earl manage to find the mushrooms, but as soon as she gets close, Callie feels an aura of malice surrounding the fungus. It's like there's an evil presence waiting to descend on the area. But Callie's like, no, I'm a grown-up STEM girly and I will not be put off by appearance, or experience, or a deep-seated gut feeling. She harvests the mushrooms, but Earl makes her promise never to go back to the patch because the fungi and their aura are too dangerous. Callie and Earl agree to go out for dinner to celebrate their find. She puts on high heels and a black mini dress that she doesn't remember buying, but then, oh no, she realises that she's left her treasured microscope in the forest. What's a STEM queen to do? Naturally, she hops on her lawnmower and drives herself back through the trees to find her pricey lab equipment without bothering to change into forest-appropriate attire first. As Callie drives her lawnmower through the forest, she notices something strange. All of the fireflies are flying in the same direction, as if they're marking out a path to something. She follows this firefly route, and she suddenly spots a lunar moth, the creature that she's been hunting for years. She sees another, and then another, and soon there are at least 100 moths flying in the same direction. She follows them, and they lead her to a fairy ring. Now in folklore, you probably know, fairy rings are circles of different coloured grass within a meadow, or circles of mushrooms that demarcate a portal from our world into fairyland. So this ring that Callie's found is made up of destroying angel mushrooms with a ring of lunar moths along the outside. It's the perfect bait to draw Callie in. Now, most people who do know European folklore understand that stepping into fairy rings is a terrible idea. Well, everyone except Callie, apparently. She can't get there fast enough. But before she can step into the ring, a golden glittering fox appears. He's ethereal and the most beautiful creature that Callie's ever seen. His aura sparkles like gold dust in the moonlight, etc., etc. You get the gist, it's pretty. So Glitter Fox snarls and snaps at Callie, trying to force her away from the ring. She dodges him and steps into the circle and promptly falls into the abyss. Callie falls through black smoke for what seems like an age until she eventually lands on something hard. Can you guess what it is? That's right, friends. Callie has literally fallen onto our love interest for the book. Folks, meet Mendax, the unseelie prince of the dark realm. Just in case you're not aware, the Seelie and Unseelie are fairies from Scottish legends. I'm not going to go into detail or debate the accuracy of the book in this video, but for the purposes of the plot, Seelie are good fairies and Unseelie are considered bad fairies. Okay? So Callie climbs off the man mountain that she just landed on and tries to run, but the prince, who is called Mendax, grabs her, which gives her a moment to take him in. And it takes a moment, because there's a lot of him actually. Callie tells us that Mendax is about 7 feet tall, with ice blue eyes and black hair. He also has wings made of smoke, which Callie cannot help but reach out and touch. Mendax, it turns out, is not a fan of having his wings stroked without consent, which is fair. He pushes Callie away and spits on her face. And now, I have nothing against this. In theory, we do not kink shame on this channel. However, it is a bit much for a first meeting, and Callie didn't consent. The Unseelie assume that Callie is an assassin sent by the humans to kill their prince. Mendax grabs Callie by the throat to keep her still and orders one of his soldiers to kill her. His guard runs Callie through and then they drop her on the forest floor, leaving her to die. While she's slowly succumbing to blood loss, Callie thinks about how she regrets not seeing her family, Eli and Saracen, again, and that she's never loved anyone wholeheartedly. She's just moments from death when the Glitter Fox comes back, this time with a friend. Glitter Fox number 1 cries over at Callie's gut wound and licks it, which heals it over. Meanwhile, Glitter Fox 2, who's apparently Glitter Fox 1's sister, scolds him because if anyone finds out about this, they'll all be in trouble and put to death. Callie sits up, stomach wound now good as new, but before she can ask the Glitter Foxes any questions, they run away. Prince Mendax comes back and is understandably shocked to find her alive. He does the traditional intimidating male protagonist trope of backing our heroine into a corner and caging her in, which just causes Callie to slap him out of reflex. Mendax seems more pleased, or maybe amused, than angry about being hit in the face. He does transform his wings into a dark, smoky hand that can reach into Callie's chest, threatening to stop her heart if she doesn't explain exactly how she didn't die from getting run through. Callie's getting a little bit tired of being thrown around by a rag doll at this point, so she tells him that it was thanks to the Glitter Foxes, and this intrigues the prince. So Mendax is like, well, fine, I won't stab you again, I'll just throw you in my dungeon. On the walk back to the palace, Callie can overhear some of the other soldiers talking, and she pricks up her ears. What she finds out is that the Fae who have shadow wings are called Shadow Slayers, and that they consider humans disgusting, and therefore would never touch them. So, how long do you think that's going to last, kids? Place your bets now. Anyway, we skip ahead a little, and Callie's been in the dungeon for a fortnight. It's dank, it's dark, it's damp, it's cold, we don't love it. But she wakes up to find that one of her guards has turned into a wolf man and is trying desperately to get into her cell, presumably to tear her to pieces. All the other guards have to team up to overpower him, and even then it's a close thing because he's just ridiculously strong. But in the end, they manage to drag him away from Callie's cell. She's a little bit shaken up from this, but there's not much she can do about it really, so she just goes back to sleep. And shortly after, our friend the brown rat, remember him from the prologue, starts visiting Callie in her cell. Unlike the other rats in the dungeon, he talks to her and keeps her company with helpful advice. You know, the things like, watch out for that particular guard, he's a bit mean, and never ask the Fae their real name, that sort of thing. So now it's day 18 of Callie being locked in a dungeon, and yay, she's getting a new cellmate. So the bog steps into the cell, and hi, welcome to your new home, and we quickly realise that he's a shapeshifter. At the moment, he looks like a sort of frog spliced with a human, with a mouthful of razor-sharp, rotted needle teeth. Callie, understandably, is not a big fan of that look, and she screams in fear at the sight of this creep coming towards her. Unfortunately for Callie, every time she screams or shows any audible sign of fear, the bog gets, let's call it excited. Guys, just be grateful that I'm heavily censoring this section because I'm saving you from the grim truth of this chapter. Now we've come full circle to the moment that started it all. The meme that my friend saw and that caused him to decide to inflict this book on me. The Frogman spunk scene. I'm not going to read it out. You can pause the video and read it for yourself if you want. So anyway, Callie's now covered in monster jizz as well as dried blood from her wound and dungeon filth. That's delightful. So this is where the prologue left us. Callie's taken from her dungeon to the Chamber of Blood, which, thank God, I'd take a Chamber of Blood over an amorous frogman any day. The chamber is a Gothic-inspired room with a white marble floor, a black chandelier and deep red walls painted in intricate gold patterns. The prince enters the chamber with Callie, who wants to be angry at him, but she can't, because our lad the prince is just too damn sexy, with his jawline and his cheekbones you could cut glass with, and his Dorito torso. Mendax tells Callie that the Seelie, the supposedly good fae, are not actually all that nice. He's like, look, check your sources, hun. They lie and they steal and they corrupt just like every other being, but they hide it behind a mask of fake goodness to pretend that they're benevolent. At least I own my darkness. Callie doesn't seem to believe him, so, I wonder which one of them's going to turn out to be right. Mendax calls out for Lord Alistair Kane, the Crown's personal assassin, who's otherwise known as the Cat o' Nine Tails. Lord Alistair has taken the form of a large panther with 9 poison-tipped tails, hence the Cat o' Nine Tails name. I do quite enjoy the subversion of that expectation that the cat would be a whip, so well done for that. Anyway, her executioner has taken the form of an animal, and what do we know about Callie and animals? That's right, animals love Callie. And Alistair likes Callie so much that he's like, listen, I've killed thousands of people in my time, but for some reason, I don't want to kill you, so here's the plan. I'll exile myself rather than hurt you. Does that sound good? Callie, of course, prefers this idea to dying, so it's on. Before he leaves, Callie mentions that her friend the brown rat has been talking to her. She assumed that all animals in fairyland could talk, but Alistair's like, what? No. Any animal that talks to you is actually a fae who's shifted into an animal form rather than a true animal. So whoever this person is, he's lying to you about what he is. Also, be careful, don't tell Mendax your name, because he's able to impel you once he knows that information. What's impelling, I hear you ask? Well, in this universe, certain fae, Mendax included, are able to control you if they know your true name. So the moral of the story is, do not tell anyone, and especially do not tell Mendax what your true name is. The story switches to Mendax's perspective for the first time, and I really wish that it didn't, because Mendax already seemed like a git when we weren't in his head, but once we're given access to his thoughts, it only makes things worse, because he's just always thinking about how hot it is when Callie is cowering in fear, and how he can see down her cleavage if she gets on her knees and begs for her life. Just gross stuff. Anyway, he grabs Callie by her throat. There's a lot of throat grabbing in this kind of novel, and it's the first time Mendax has touched her without a glove on. He's amazed at how soft her skin is, so I suppose Callie moisturises? Mendax asks Callie her name, and despite Lord Alistair's advice, she tells him that she's called Callie Peterson. After that, Mendax just throws her back into the cell with the forest bog. We switch back to Callie's perspective, thank God, and she's not impressed. The bog tries to assault her again, so she enucleates him with a spoon, bashes his head in with a brick, and then uses the bones from one of his fingers to fashion a key to let herself out of her cell. And fair enough, serves the bog right, to be honest. She's about to escape when Brown Rat reappears, and he's all like, no, wait, don't go, you're safer inside the cell than out. So Callie turns to him and says, and why should I trust you when you're hiding what you are? You're not even a rat, are you? So Walter's like, fine, you caught me, I'm not a rat. I'm actually Walter, the prince's best friend / brother, and also the werewolf that tried to get you out of your cell last week. Callie still doesn't believe that she's safer in her cell than out of it, so she basically tells him, look, I'm leaving whether you want me to or not, and that's just how it is. So then Walter agrees to lead her to safety out of the Unseelie Palace because he says that she'll die if he doesn't. So they're running and ducking into shadows and alcoves to avoid being seen as they try and get out of the palace. At one point they have to squish into a laundry cupboard to avoid some servants, and they press very close together. Now remember that Callie hasn't had a bath at this point, so she's still covered in mud and blood and monster jizz, so this can't be very pleasant for Walter to be close to. So because they're in such close quarters, they end up making conversation, and Walter tells Callie that the only fae that can turn into glitter foxes are Seelie royalty, and the fact that they saved her life means that she is now theirs to command, until they decide to kill her. So that's fun. So then they keep running, heading for the roof, because Walter knows that there's a portal up there that can take Callie away from the Unseelie realm and over to safety. Unfortunately, the evil prince's evil mum is throwing a party that night. Callie opens the door to a room that should take her to a staircase that leads to the roof, and the staircase is there, but so is the Queen's party. She and Walter accidentally stumble into a room full of fae, and fae think that hunting humans is the most fun thing that you can do with all your clothes on, so the whole party drops what they're doing and gives chase. Callie and Walter make it to the roof, but who's waiting for them up there? That's right, it's Mendax. The prince and the Walter fight for a moment. Walter's in wolf form and trying to tear out Mendax's throat, and the prince is using his shadow wings to throw Walter around the roof, but the fight is only going to end one way. Mendax grabs Walter, remember, this man is his best friend and his brother, by the scruff of his neck and throws him off the roof. But don't worry, dear watcher. If you thought that this was going to result in some conflict or tension or consequences or any of those good things that make reading books interesting, don't panic. It's revealed immediately that Mendax actually just threw Walter through the portal into the Seelie realm and, presumably, right into the sequel. After these escapades, Mendax decides to keep Callie as a pet. He's intrigued that she managed to convince his personal assassin not to kill her, and that she murdered the bog single-handedly, and that she made a key out of a finger bone. He has a cage built in his room to house her, and he also makes sure to keep her on a lead, because he's just such a responsible pet owner. Through all of this, Callie is still attracted to Mendax to the point of distraction. Every time that he's stripping her of her agency, or perpetrating some horror against her and or her friends, just remember that Callie keeps thinking about how hot he is while he's doing that. I mean, interesting taste you've got there, Callie. Go off, I guess. So now we're at the point of the story where our female protagonist gets a makeover, courtesy of Mendax's shadowy handmaiden scrubbing her down like she's an inanimate object rather than a person, and, you guessed it, he can't believe how hot she is now that she's clean. He has her dressed up in a white silk gown that doesn't leave much to the imagination in preparation for another party. As soon as we're at this party, Callie makes sure to mention to us that A, the women are all jealous of how pretty she is, and B, all the men can't stop looking at her because she's just so damn hot in this dress that Mendax has put her in. Because Callie's literally being tugged along by a lead, she falls over when her guard pulls too hard. A fae man helps her up and reassures her, so Mendax kills her in one blow. Specifically, one stab just below where his left wing meets his right shoulder, and he does this because this man dared to touch her, which... relationship goals. Mendax announces to the party that he's tried to kill Callie 3 times and failed 3 times, so now he's offering her a deal for the entertainment and enjoyment of his court. He'll try and kill her 3 more times in a set of trials. If she loses, she dies, but if Callie wins, he'll send her back to the human realm. Callie doesn't actually agree to this bargain, but nevertheless she's transported to a strange forest where 2 winged beasts start to track her, raining down acid-covered ball bearings as they do. These little burning marbles bury themselves in her flesh, tiring her out and wearing her down. But Callie's not about to be beaten by Big Bird and his mate. She uses her galaxy brain to deduce that they're tracking her via echolocation. But she's spent years studying the lunar moth, which is a prey animal. And what eats lunar moths? Bats. How do bats hunt? Echolocation. Lunar moths have come up with an adaptation to help protect them against bats. They have these long tails with a twist in them, which means that when bats try and use their echolocation on the lunar moths, the echoes ping back off their twisted tails in all directions, confusing the predators. Callie knows exactly what to do. She modifies the skirt of her dress into a spiral tail that throws off the bird's tracking, which is a cool bit of real-world information. Now that she's befuddled the birds, Callie doesn't waste any time. She grabs a pointy stick from the forest floor and stabs first one bird, then the other, in that spot below the left wing where Mendax stabbed that other guy. Once both birds are dead, she's won the trial. She's battered and bruised and covered in acid burns, but she's victorious and she's teleported back to the palace. Mendax decides to treat Callie's wounds himself. For some reason, this involves Callie lying in bed not wearing much while the hot prince stands between her legs and tenderly heals her. We also get this amazing line from Mendax, and I quote, "You develop a taste for blood when you're constantly licking your own wounds," which, thank you, Ebony Darkness Dementia Ravenway. While Mendax is neutralising her acid burns, he asks again, "Why did the humans send you to kill me?" And Callie's like, "My dude, look at me. I hadn't even been in Fairyland for 2 seconds before you captured me. I've nearly died like 4 times minimum, and I have absolutely zero battle prowess. Why do you refuse to believe that I'm not an assassin?" Mendax does what he's best at, which is of course ignoring her, but he does give her the blanket from on top of his bed to sleep on. Ooh, do you think our grumpy leading man could be starting to thaw? Apparently, Callie is slowly winning him over with her attempts to bludgeon him to death with candlesticks, which, I mean, good for you, Mendax. Mendax heads back to his room where Callie is still in her cage. This obviously puts him in the mood, because of course it does, but Callie explicitly says no. So therefore, Mendax backs off immediately and, I'm just kidding. Of course, he disregards her completely and proceeds to, I believe the approved euphemism is feast. Now, say it with me, kids, because apparently Mendax needs the reminder. Arousal is not consent. Consent is a continued and enthusiastic yes. So, moving swiftly on from that assault scene, some Fae maids are helping Callie to get ready for the next trial, and they tell her that Mendax is actually a really nice guy, and he saved them from the previous king, and they can tell that he actually really likes Callie, so they want her to bond with him so that he can ascend the throne. Callie says, in no uncertain terms, that she does not want to be bonded with this man. So if you're wondering what bonding is, from what I can gather, it's like a mind link that lets you feel each other's emotions and thoughts and stuff. I think that's what it is. I mean, it's not brilliantly explained, but that's what I can gather. So off they go to the next trial, but who's in the audience this time? 2 Seelie, you know, the good fairies who can sparkle, those ones. 2 Seelie are in attendance, Princes Aurelius and Langmo. When they see Callie, they're furious with Mendax because apparently the Seelie have jurisdiction over humans and the Unseelie do not. They try to take Callie away into their custody, so Mendax does the only reasonable things and kills Langmuir in a horribly violent way. Before Aurelius can whisk Callie away, Mendax gets his evil queen mother to bond him and Callie together, despite Callie's desperate refusal. So now they're linked, and Mendax turns to Aurelius and says, and I quote, "She's my future wife now, Aurelius, and I can and will do anything to her that I like." So they're linked for life now, which, hate that for you, bestie. In the privacy of his inner monologue, Mendax finally admits to himself that he loves Callie. And truly, if this is love, you can bloody keep it, because I do not want it. Anyway, the second trial starts. Callie opens her eyes in a cavern with nothing but a table and 7 cups full of different liquids. She's told that 4 of them contain poison and the others have antidotes. Callie has to drink all of them. If she drinks in the correct order, she'll survive. If she drinks in the wrong order, she'll be poisoned to death. Oh, and the room is slowly filling with snakes at the same time. Callie realises that she can feel Mendax's emotions now that they're bonded, so she can feel that he's actually really scared for her right now, like, you know, his heart is in his throat and he's just praying that she's going to work out how to survive. Callie, of course, is a biologist, so she uses her knowledge of plants to work out which of the liquids are poisonous and which ones are antidotes. You might have clocked, though, that 7 is an odd number, so therefore there is 1 more goblet of poison than there is of antidote. Callie drinks 6 of them, and she gets them right, so she's not dying. But there's 1 goblet left. She has no option but to drink it, and she realises immediately that it's poison. And she just lies down on the table like, this is it, I'm about to die, this wasn't how I wanted to go out. But then Callie's galaxy brain works out what the final antidote is: snake venom. She rolls off the table and does her best Cleopatra impression, forcing one of the snakes to bite her on the tit. And it works! The venom counteracts the final poison and she lives. Mendax carries her away bridal style and insists on sucking the venom out of her breast himself. And I don't know what to say to that except, oi, Mendax, your Oedipus complex is showing, alright? Pack it in. So Callie's noticed that the Fae like to make deals, so she suggests a bargain. In return for letting him suck her boob, Mendax must promise to never impel her by using the name magic. He agrees to this, and to level the playing field, he tells her what his true name is, Malum Mendax. I'm not sure why she's comforted by this promise not to impel her, because he also says that he's planning on reneging on their earlier deal and keeping her prisoner even if she passes the third test. He's going to keep her as his captive forever, and there's nothing she can do about it. He tells her, again this is a direct quote, "I'm the bad guy, Callie, which is why you will never ever be free of me again." So at least he's self-aware. Oh, and he also edges her before telling her to go to sleep while he works out a way to throw the next trial in her favour so that he can keep her alive. So early in the book, the plot, to me at least, felt like it was moving at a snail's pace, but now we're really going at breakneck speed because we're already at trial number 3. The third trial is the Gridiron of Fate, which is a fancy name for your standard choose one of two doors scenario. Behind one door is a portal to the human world and, therefore, freedom, even though Mendax has already told her that he's never actually going to let her go. Behind the other door, there's a monster that will eat Callie immediately if she chooses incorrectly. Callie steals a dagger from one of the guards on their way to the trial and hides it in her waistband. She's put in front of the two doors, and Mendax tells her to choose the door on the right. She decides to trust him and does as he says. The door opens, and a human-hungry monster that looks like a cross between a dragon and a tyrannosaurus storms out, ready to eat her. Callie's immediate assumption is, oh shit, he thinks I'm assassin and he gave me the wrong door so that I could be eaten, and she tries to defend herself with her tiny little dagger. But Mendax teleports himself in front of her and he's quickly explaining, "I'm so sorry, my mum switched the doors at the last moment because she knew I'd help you, but don't worry," and he's using his shadow wings to fight the beasts off. So while Mendax is busy fighting off the monster, Callie takes the opportunity and runs for the portal back to the human realm. Before she can make it though, the beast disentangles himself from Mendax and grabs her and tries to eat her, slicing up Callie's legs on its teeth as he does. Like she's fully in his mouth and she's about to become a dino snack. But before it can chew its food, Mendax uses his impelling powers to take over the beast's mind and forces him to spit her out. The next and last thing he forces the monster to do is to tear out its own heart and drop it at Mendax's feet like a present. So now that the danger's over, Mendax grabs Callie and hugs her to celebrate the fact that they're both still alive, and Callie stabs him below his left wing with her dagger. And Mendax absolutely did not see this coming. He drops to his knees with Callie's dagger still sticking out of his back, and then keels over in the dirt on the floor of the arena. He still wants her to stay though, which makes sense because what's a little light-hearted attempted murder between friends, right? Callie's having none of it though, and she runs for the portal to the human realm. In a desperate bid to get her to stay, Mendax tries to impel her to remain with him, breaking his promise never to use the magic of a name on her. Unfortunately for Mendax, this doesn't work, because the name that Callie gave him earlier was a lie, just like everything else she ever told him. She gives him one last sad look and steps through the portal into the human realm, leaving him bleeding to death on the floor, just like he did to her when she first arrived in the forest. Calypso, which is Callie's real name, wakes up in a hospital surrounded by Crazy Earl and her other friends from the town. They tell her that she was just hallucinating from the mushrooms and she's lucky to be alive. A nurse notices that Callie's starting to feel a little bit overwhelmed by all this, so she says that everyone has to leave except for one visitor, and soon Callie and Earl are left alone. Earl immediately turns into Eli, her long-lost best friend, but that's not all. Eli isn't just Eli. He's Aurelius, the Seelie prince from trial number 2. It turns out that after Calypso's mother and sister died, the Seelies basically took her in as a thank you for saving Queen Saracen's life from the Unseelie Queen's attack all those years ago. The Seelies had told Callie that she could come and live with them in their court if she proved her alliance by murdering the Unseelie prince. Until she completed that task, the Seelie Queen had taken half of Calypso's heart as collateral, meaning that she could never love someone until her mission was complete. So Callie technically didn't lie because she wasn't an assassin sent by the humans. She was an assassin sent by the Seelie. Calypso gives us one last exposition dump, explaining that she's been the Seelie Queen's assassin in the human world since she was a child. That's how she knew all about poisons, and that's how she knew how to make bombs, and that's how she knew how to use a dagger. Even though Calypso knows intellectually that she should be happy to be back with her best friend, who is also the shifter who turned into Glitterfox and saved her life, she's just not very happy. She can sense that something's wrong. Eli holds her hand to comfort her, but she feels disgusted by his touch, and her skin starts emanating black smoke tendrils, just like those ones that Mendax can command. And she keeps getting flickers of emotion at the back of her mind that don't quite feel like hers. They feel like they belong to Mendax, who's not actually dead, and will presumably be joining us in book number 2. Comments. To be fair, this book was not unsalvageable. There were some really quite good parts. For example, there's a nice world building scene where Callie notices that the Fae use large sentient fireflies rather than light bulbs. However, there were lots of things that could have done with tweaking. One thing I noticed is that the author spells yeah like yay, as in Y-E-A, as in yay or nay. And this isn't relevant, but it is funny to me. It makes every character sound like they're the town crier about to announce that the king has died. Something less fun is that this book has quite a lot of slut-shaming, but the person that Calypso is shaming is herself. She keeps describing the black dress she's wearing as slutty and a hooker dress, even though she's the one that's wearing it. It might be foreshadowing, like a way to try and show that Calypso would never wear this dress, but Callie, her assassin alter ego, would wear the dress. It serves a more subconscious role, of course. It means that the audience gets to project themselves into Calypso's place as a fantasy of looking hot in a little black dress, but they get to pretend that they themselves are above wanting to look hot in a little black dress. They're simply forced to look hot by the situation that they've been forced into, purely victims of circumstance. But honestly, what's wrong with wanting to look hot in a little black dress? I'd do it all the time if I had a corporeal body that was capable of that sort of thing. But alas, I'm just a disembodied voice that manifests from the ether to rant about things on the internet. Another noticeable detail that's not bad exactly, but it does pull you out of the reading experience a bit, is that words are often used wrong. For example, the author likes to use the word careened instead of craned. Now, this is understandable, but it does give a very funny mental image when she describes Calypso careening her head, and you just have to imagine her wildly flinging her head around like her neck's made of overcooked pasta. That's not the only mix-up, though. She uses the word clamour instead of clamber, wrapped instead of wrapped, weariness instead of weariness, and weariness instead of weariness. There's portcullis instead of crenellations, deceitfully instead of deceptively, deceiving rather than betraying, lulled instead of lulled, baluster instead of banister, breach instead of breach, past instead of past, over and over again, just lots of little words like that. Now, I'm not saying that mixing up words is wrong. It's the sort of thing that I do all the time. But it is unusual in a published work, especially because the author thanks her editor in the acknowledgements section, so we have to assume that there is someone who was reading this through and should have picked up on these kinds of things. Another thing that bothered me was Calypso will often say things like, "That's the moment when I truly snapped and became mad," which sounds interesting, but then she goes on acting exactly as she had before. She doesn't act like she's gone mad, even though that's what she says. So grand statements like this can be useful if they do truly signify a turning point in the narrative, but they have no payoff here because right after she says it, she's back to acting normal again. So it's disappointing, especially because it happens more than once. Also, some scenes are repeated so that we get them from both Callie's and Mendax's point of view. Sometimes this even happens one after the other. For example, the rooftop scene where Walter gets thrown off the roof. We see it from Callie's view, and then we immediately see it from Mendax's as well. So you're forced to sit through the same exact events twice with very little new information, and that just makes it boring. It's unnecessary and should have been cut, in my opinion. That plot twist. I did manage to guess that Calypso would be stabbing Mendax after the third trial, but that's more because I've read books like this before, so I'm a bit familiar with the tropes rather than because the groundwork was laid in such a way that I could work it out logically. Now, I understand wanting to keep the surprise of a plot twist, and there were some attempts at foreshadowing, like, for example, Calypso's ability to improvise weapons and escape methods, her mentions of wanting to see her family again, even though we were told that her mother and sister died in a car crash, the suggestions that she has a dark side that no one else gets to see, little things like that. And there are also several times where she says things like, "I feel like I only have half a heart," which does, foreshadow the fact that Queen Saracen took half of her heart away. So these things could technically count as clues, but the choice to tell the story in first person means that we're in Calypso's mind with her. So when we get her thinking things like, "A laugh snorted out of me at the thought of him also thinking I was some next level assassin," what did they all think humans could do against a fae that caused them to be so frightened? So it's not really fair to then have her become an assassin all along. because why would she lie about that in her own head to her own self? On rereading this book for the video, I did spot that there seemed to be some sort of specific amnesia around her mission at the beginning of the story. She doesn't remember buying the so-called slutty dress that she uses as her second job murdering people. She doesn't remember being blessed by the Seelie Queen so that animals will love her. Maybe she also doesn't remember that she's an assassin. And that would make sense. I mean, there's even a moment after Walter gets thrown off the roof where she says that something's cracked and there's knowledge seeping through and she understands things now. But this is something that I only caught when I read it through again. Maybe I'm just dense. It was a bit too subtle. Like, there's no clear, obvious moment where something jogs her memory and causes the epiphany that she has to murder her new hot captor. She's just lying to herself to keep the audience in the dark, which makes no sense narratively. After all, she doesn't know that we, the readers, are privy to her thoughts. As far as Callie's concerned, she's not a character in a book, she's a person, so she shouldn't be lying for the benefit of the audience. And also, after they're bonded, Mendax can read her thoughts too. So it really doesn't make sense that he doesn't see her betrayal coming, because he should have read it in her mind before she even got close to him. Now, I don't think that the twist itself is bad, though. In fact, I am all for Mendax getting stabbed, but it should have been for different reasons. Now, I would have recommended a change if the author had brought the book to me and asked my opinion. I would have said, make it so that Calypso is not an assassin on a mission to kill Mendax. He can assume that that's what she is, and they can still fall in love, if that's what you want to call this, over the course of the book. But let's not forget that when Calypso fell on him, Mendax was literally about to invade the human realm and murder every person he could find. And Calypso knows this, so even though she's fallen in love with him, and even though she never wanted her to fly in her life, she could still feel like she has no choice but to stab her one true love to stop him from murdering everyone she knows and cares about. After all, if she doesn't, billions of people will die. So if you ask me, that's the better plotline, because that way she betrays him, but he has no one to blame but himself. Similarities to A Court of Thorns and Roses. Now, I've purposely stayed away from the reviews and discourse on this book so that I could come at it with fresh eyes, but if I had to guess what the biggest complaint would be after probably that plot twist was stupid, it would be, she ripped off A Court of Thorns and Roses. Now, to be fair, young adult dark romance is a thriving genre, and all genres of literature have tropes that pop up. So A Court of Thorns and Roses and How Does It Feel are both in the young adult dark romance category, so it only makes sense that they would be some crossover there. That being said, there are a few things that seem, in my opinion, to be a little bit too similar to A Court of Thorns and Roses, so this is a non-exhaustive list, but this is what I could think of. You've got a hyper-contact female protagonist who's whisked away to fairyland. You get the good, so-called golden boy, who turns out to be not so good after all, and the protagonist ends up falling for the dangerous guy who's associated with nighttime and shadows. Calypso has to fight the forest bog, and Feyre has to deal with the bog in A Court of Thorns and Roses. Calypso is given 3 trials to prove herself by Mendax. Feyre has to take on 3 trials given to her by Amarantha. Both Feyre and Calypso spend significant amounts of time in the dungeon. Mate bonds occur in A Court of Thorns and Roses, and bonds pop up in How Does It Feel? Calypso has half a heart because the Seelie Queen took the other half. Tamlin in A Court of Thorns and Roses has a heart made of stone. Mendax has shadow servants whose job it is to give Calypso a makeover, and Rhysand has Nuala and Cerridwen, wraith maids who are in charge of beautifying Feyre while they're under the mountain. Both Feyre and Calypso end up stabbing their love interests, but luckily for them, both of these men turn out to be immune to stabbing. And finally, Mendax has shadow powers as a shadow slayer, which seem very similar to Asriel's shadow singer abilities in A Court of Thorns and Roses. Now again, some of these are just tropes of the genre, but they're just a little bit too close to comfort for me. Predictions for the future books. So I was thinking, what's going to happen next? And I've got a couple of predictions. Firstly, I think that the Seelie will definitely turn out to be not as good as they pretend to be. In fact, I wonder if Queen Saracen had something to do with the death of Calypso's mother and sister. Possibly that was her way of getting a human assassin who could do her dirty work undetected in the human realm. Either way, Calypso will realise that the darkness is actually not so bad, just like Feyre does in A Court of Mist and Fury. I'm sorry, I'll stop with the A Court of Thorns and Roses comparisons. So another thing Mendax cannot impel Calypso through the power of her name because he doesn't actually know her true name. However, he does have her wisdom tooth. And in many traditions of magic, it is said that you can control people if you have a piece of them, for example, some hair, nail clippings, or a tooth. So if name magic exists, then the magic of controlling someone with part of themselves might exist too. So Calypso might not be as immune to being impelled as she thinks she is. So I think that Alistair, the Cat of Nine Tails, will come back, or at least I hope he does, because he was quite an interesting character. Walter's definitely going to be back as well. Calypso will almost definitely be turning up in the Seelie realm, and that's where Walter's portal went to, so I'll be very surprised if we don't see him again. Also, Calypso will eventually notice that the Seelie are not actually that good, but also they can't accept her darkness, which Mendax keeps going on about. So therefore, she'll eventually betray her former BFF Eli and his mum, Queen Saracen, in order to be with Mendax. Conclusion. I hope that you enjoyed coming on this odyssey with me. Please don't have a go at the author or anything like that. She's just trying to bring her art to life. And like I said, there are some definitely good things about this book. Hopefully she'll learn from the reviews and make her second book even better. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.